The most expensive restaurant in town was packed. Amidst laughter, glasses, and candlelight, an elegant man looked at the plate in front of him with disdain. "Is this what you call real food?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The waiters looked at each other. The restaurant owner, visibly embarrassed, tried to keep his tone calm. But the customer, arrogant, accustomed to humiliating those who served him, had no idea that night, fate had prepared something far more indigestible than the dish on his table. Because minutes later, he would find out who really cooked that dinner, and that discovery would change everything. If you believe that respect is the best spice of life, leaves the like, with subscribe to the channel, and activates the bell. Here in Dark Karma Stories, each meal comes with a lesson served hot. The clock struck 8:30 at night when the restaurant lights, the golden house reflected in the crystal glasses and the golden frames on the walls. It was the kind of place where every detail screamed luxury, and every dish cost what many people earned in a week. In the center of the room, a man in a navy blue suit and a shiny watch adjusted the napkin on his lap with the impatience of someone who believed that time was a privilege. Eduardo Salgado, a well-known businessman in the city, had a reputation for being demanding. But the waiters knew. Demanding was an understatement. He was arrogant, cold, and accustomed to turning dinners into minor humiliations. "I ordered my meal 20 minutes ago," he said without looking up from his phone. "Is this a restaurant or a gourmet joke?" The waiter, visibly nervous, tried to maintain a professional tone. "I apologize, sir. The chef is finishing the preparation. It's a special dish." "Special for whom?" the man interrupted ironically. "Because to me it just seems like a delay." Other customers looked on discreetly. Some already knew him from headlines and acidic comments at local elite events. Eduardo felt powerful in this role, the one who could complain and the world would bend. The waiter hurried away. In the corner of the kitchen, the chef Rafael watched through the small window of the pass. His expression was calm, but his gaze said much more. He had heard every word, and he knew exactly who was sitting at table 7. As he assembled the dish with surgical precision, he spoke softly to his assistant. "It's funny. Fate has a sharp sense of humor. Today it's going to serve something that Mr. Eduardo can't even find on the menu." The assistant laughed, not quite understanding what the chef meant. But Rafael knew. He knew because that dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a reunion with a past that Eduardo had forgotten. In the hall, impatience was growing. Eduardo drummed his fingers on the table. The woman at his side, Clara, tried to calm him down. "Honey, it's just food. Relax." "It's the least I expect when I pay so much," he replied. "Incompetent people drive me crazy." The waiter returned, delicately bringing the plate. A thin layer of mushroom risotto with truffle shavings and wine reduction. The aroma was impeccable, but Eduardo didn't even wait for the description. He picked up the fork and took the first bite. He made a grimace of contempt. "Is this serious?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's salty." The waiter turned pale. "May I ask for adjustment, sir?" "Adjust?" he interrupted. "Teach this cook to use his taste buds before stirring the pot." Camilla, the oldest waitress on the team, tried to hide her embarrassment. The entire hall had stopped for a moment. Eduardo, as always, had turned the meal into a spectacle. "Bring the chef," he ordered. "I want to speak to him personally." The waiter swallowed hard and disappeared through the kitchen door. In the background, Rafael wiped his hands on a cloth and smiled slightly. "So he's still the same," he murmured. "Chef, he's asking to speak to you, sir," the waiter warned. "Of course," Rafael replied, adjusting his apron. "Let's give Mr. Salgado what he likes so much. Attention." When the kitchen door opened, the sound of cutting utensils stopped. Rafael walked to the table with firm steps. The entire restaurant watched the moment, curious. Eduardo, distracted, didn't even look up. "What's up? Did you come to teach me to like salt?" he said sarcastically. Rafael stopped in front of the table and calmly replied, "No, sir. I just came to see if the taste of the dish brought back any memories." Eduardo finally looked up. For an instant, time froze. His expression changed. surprise, doubt, and discomfort all at once. Rafael's face was familiar to him, very familiar. But before he could say anything, the chef added, "It's been 7 years since you last ate something I prepared." Eduardo blinked, trying to remember. "You worked for me?" "I used to work," Rafael replied with a tight smile. "Until the day you said cooking was for losers." A heavy silence took over the place. The customers looked at each other, and Clara looked at her husband, embarrassed. Rafael continued, "But today I'm grateful for that day, because it was at that moment that I learned the value of what I do, and the taste of respect." Eduardo was speechless. For the first time in years, there was no ready answer, no arrogant argument, just the bitter taste of one's own behavior coming back in the form of a lesson. Rafael turned and walked back to the kitchen while the room murmured discreetly. Eduardo remained motionless, staring at the plate in front of him. Suddenly, salt didn't seem like the problem anymore. It was pride, and that, he knew, was the hardest spice to swallow. The sound of cutlery slowly returned, but the atmosphere in the restaurant remained tense. Eduardo remained seated, motionless, with his fork suspended in the air. Clara watched him in silence, trying to decipher what had just happened. The man who used to dominate any room seemed, for the first time, small in front of everyone. He stared at the kitchen door, through which Chef Rafael had disappeared. The name hammered in his head, like a distant echo. Rafael Moretti. The memory began to emerge, fragmented, uncomfortable. Years before, Rafael had been one of the most promising employees at the gastronomic events company that Eduardo ran. Talented, educated, and passionate about what he did. But for Eduardo, passion didn't pay the bills, and humility, at that time, was synonymous with weakness. He clearly remembered the day he fired him. Rafael had suggested changing the menu for an important corporate dinner. I wanted to include dishes inspired by his simple childhood, saying that good food is food that has soul. Eduardo laughed in front of everyone. He called him a bar cook and said he would never let a kitchen employee decide what rich customers would eat. Rafael simply responded with a serene look, the same look he saw just minutes ago, now coming from the chef of the most refined restaurant in the city. Eduardo swallowed hard. The waiter approached hesitantly. "Shall I take the plate, sir?" He took a deep breath. "No," he replied, his voice lower than usual. "I want to talk to him again." In the kitchen, Rafael calmly washed his hands. The assistant looked at him nervously. "Chef, he's asking to see you again." Rafael just nodded. "I figured you would." She cleaned her apron, looked at her watch, and took a deep breath before leaving. As he walked through the door, the hall fell silent again. Eyes turned to him, and to Eduardo, who now looked like a different man. "I need to talk to you," said Eduardo, standing up. Rafael kept his tone calm. "Of course, right here?" "Outside," the businessman replied. "I prefer it away from people." They went to the garden at the side of the restaurant, where the soft lights of the lamps discreetly illuminated the empty tables. The distant sound of ambient music gave an almost melancholic tone to the scene. Eduardo was the first to speak. "I remember you," he said, "and I remember what I told you, that I was a failure." Rafael added, without rancor. "Yes," the businessman replied, embarrassed. "And today, seeing where you've gotten to, I realize I was the one who failed." Rafael watched him in silence. "Success isn't about where you sit, Eduardo," he said. "It's about what you do with the people around you." The businessman ran his hand through his hair, restless. "I wasn't like that. Or maybe I always was, and I'm just realizing it now. I thought being respected meant making others fear me." Rafael replied calmly. "Fear is not respect. Fear is what remains when respect is gone." The words hit Eduardo with the force of a silent punch. The cold night wind seemed to carry away the memories he was trying to hide. He remembered the employees he had humiliated, the friends he had lost, the looks he avoided in meetings. For years he had built an empire, but now he realized its foundations were of pride. "Do you hate me?" he asked, lowering his head. Rafael shook his head with a slight gesture. No, I appreciate it. If you hadn't gotten me out of there, I might never have had the courage to open this place. Sometimes pain is the missing spice to add flavor to change. Eduardo remained silent, his eyes filled with tears. You prepared this dish for me on purpose, didn't you? Rafael smiled. Yes, he replied. It's the same dish I suggested at the dinner you refused. The same one you called food too simple for the rich. Eduardo stood still. Rafael continued, and ironically, it's the most ordered dish in this restaurant. Eduardo took a deep breath, his voice breaking. I deserved every word of yours. No, Eduardo, Rafael replied. What you deserved was the chance to prove your true worth. Fate only served up what you asked for without realizing it. They were silent for a while. The restaurant lights reflected off the bowls on nearby tables, creating a glow that seemed to paint the scene of redemption. Eduardo, with a sincere tone, extended his hand. I owe you an apology. Rafael shook his hand. And I owe you gratitude. Life is curious, isn't it? Sometimes the student and the teacher switch places without realizing it. The two looked at each other, and for an instant, the weight of the past dissolved into the air. When they returned inside, Clara watched from afar, surprised by her husband's light expression. He sat down, looked him at the plate again, and this time tasted it calmly. He smiled discreetly. It's perfect, he said to the waiter. You can tell the chef that. The flavor is unforgettable. The waiter smiled, not understanding the deep meaning of those words. But Rafael, from the kitchen, understood perfectly. Respect had finally been served. The kitchen was almost silent when Rafael leaned against the stainless steel counter and observed the dining room through the small window. He saw Eduardo finish dinner, calmer, and for a moment he thought about everything he had to face to get to that moment. The face of the man who had once humiliated him was a perfect mirror of the past, a past he had sworn never again to let control the present. But inside him, the memory still had flavor, taste of salt, sweat, and resistance. Years ago, when he was fired by Eduardo, Rafael had left the company with a box of cheap utensils, a stained apron, and a diploma forgotten in a drawer. At that time, I lived in a simple room at the back of a boarding house. He had no contacts, no prestige, and barely any money to eat. But he had something that the pride of others could never steal: his love for cooking. He remembered the first week after he was fired. I spent my days walking around the city with resumes in hand, stopping at restaurants, bakeries, and bars. Some ignored him, others said there was no vacancy. Until a small corner restaurant, the Dona Helena's, accepted him, not as a chef, but as a kitchen assistant. And it was there, among rusty frying pans and barely working stoves, that he relearned the value of work. The owner of the place, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Antonio, was the one who taught him the phrase he never forgot. Cooking is serving the souls of others. If it's just for money, the dish is stillborn. Rafael never saw food the same way again. He spent months there, absorbing everything, learning to season not just with salt and herbs, but with feeling. It was in this small restaurant that he created the dish that would later make him famous, a simple risotto made with fresh mushrooms and truffles, inspired by the meals his mother prepared when money was tight. The secret is in the care of the cook, not in the price of the dish, he said to himself. His reputation began to grow, first among neighborhood customers, then in local publications, and soon came invitations to larger events. A food critic tasted his risotto at a festival and wrote, "Finally, a chef who understands that the flavor of food comes not from the richness of the ingredients, but from the richness of the soul." It was the push that was needed. Over time, Rafael opened his own restaurant, the Golden House, the same one in which the man who had once despised him now served. As the chef remembered, the kitchen door opened. Camilla, the shift manager, approached. "Are you okay, Rafael?" He smiled slightly. "I am. It's weird. I thought I would feel angry, but what I feel is gratitude." "Gratitude?" she asked. "For someone who humiliated you?" "Yes," he replied, Because if it weren't for that day, maybe I would have settled down. Sometimes it's the pain that pushes us toward the right life. Camilla nodded. You're different, Rafael. Most people would have used this opportunity to get revenge. And what would I gain from that? He replied. Revenge is a dish that, even when hot, never satisfies. She smiled, admiring the calmness with which he spoke. Rafael looked back at the living room, where Eduardo was finishing his coffee. The businessman's arrogance seemed to have dissolved in the vapor of time, and for the first time the chef understood that forgiveness has the same effect as a good seasoning. It transforms the bitter into something bearable. Later, when the restaurant closed, Rafael was left alone. The silent kitchen was a sanctuary. He turned on just one light over the counter and began preparing the risotto once more, just for himself. As she slowly stirred the rice, she remembered her mother saying, "My son, those who cook with love never go hungry, neither of food nor of peace." He served himself on a small plate, sat at the staff table, and ate slowly, savoring every bite. He was no longer the fired young man or the humiliated cook. He was a man who had understood the meaning of his own journey. The past did not define him. The pain was no longer a wound, but an ingredient. And in that moment, alone among pots and pans and memories, Rafael realized that the greatest achievement in life is not success, but the serenity of knowing that everything, even humiliation, serves to temper who you are. 2 days have passed since the dinner that became news among the regulars of the Golden House. Some told the story with curiosity, others with amazement, and all wanted to know more about the rich man who had been confronted by his own past. But for Rafael, the episode was just another chapter closed, or at least that's what he thought. On Friday night, the hall was busier than usual. The golden lights reflected off the glasses and the scent of fresh herbs filled the air. Rafael, focused on the kitchen, coordinated the team calmly and precisely. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the waiter Camilo approached, a little tense. "Chef," he began, hesitating. "There's a customer at table 5 asking to speak to you. Ask him to wait a moment. It's the same man from the other night." Rafael stopped. The noise of the pots continued around him, but he felt a brief silence inside, as if time had stopped. Eduardo was back. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and left the kitchen. This time, there was no tension in the air, no curious glances. The businessman was alone, sitting at the same table, with a completely different expression. There was no arrogance, just serenity. "Good evening, Rafael," he said, standing up. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Good evening," the chef replied, his tone as calm as ever. "Have you come to complain about another dish?" Eduardo smiled slightly. "Actually, I came to say thank you." The two sat down. The waiter brought 2 glasses of wine and the restaurant continued at its normal pace, while a different kind of conversation began. "I spent these 2 days thinking about what happened," Eduardo began, "and I came to the conclusion that it was never about the food." Rafael watched him in silence. "It was about me, about who I had become." He paused. "You served me what I most needed to taste, the memory of what I was." Rafael folded his hands on the table. "Sometimes life puts the same plate in front of us until we learn to savor what really matters." Eduardo nodded. "When I called you a failure, I was talking about myself and didn't realize it. I thought success was having people beneath me, when in fact, true success is deserving respect, even when no one has to respect you." The chef kept his gaze serene, but within him there was something akin to compassion. "I understand. Arrogance is like a strong seasoning. At first it seems impressive, but then it ruins the flavor of everything." Eduardo laughed discreetly, with a sad mood. "Yeah, and the worst part is that I thought money gave me the right to be rude, to humiliate. But I realized that the higher the step, the harder the fall when pride slips." The silence between the two was broken only by the soft sound of a piano coming from the main hall. Eduardo took a deep breath and continued. "I wanted to apologize again, not just for what I did in the past, but for what I became." "And why did you come here today?" asked Rafael. Because I needed to end this cycle the right way. And also because, he paused, I wanted to try that dish one more time. Rafael smiled. I think it will have a different flavor now. He got up and went to the kitchen. This time he prepared the risotto calmly, but with something different. As I mixed the rice, I added not just ingredients, but meaning. Every movement was a memory, every seasoning a souvenir. When he returned with the plate, the entire room seemed to watch, albeit discreetly. He placed it in front of Eduardo, who took a deep breath before tasting it. He closed his eyes. He chewed slowly. It's perfect, he said, his voice breaking. But it doesn't taste the same as the other night. Of course not, Rafael replied. Because now the seasoning is different. Regret tastes different from pride. They both smiled. Not as chef and customer, but as two men who had lived opposite sides of the same apprenticeship. Eduardo finished his plate in silence. When he got up to leave, he left an envelope on the table. It's not money, he explained. It's an invitation. Rafael opened it. It was an invitation to a charity event that Eduardo was organizing, aimed at funding scholarships for young low-income chefs. I want to help those who have talent but never had the opportunity, he said, just like you never had. Rafael looked at the paper and smiled, moved. So maybe fate is serving the second course of our story. Eduardo nodded, his gaze calm and grateful. And this time I promise not to complain about the taste. 2 weeks have passed since the reunion at the restaurant. Rafael returned to his routine, but every now and then, the invitation Eduardo left on the table still came to his mind. It wasn't just an event. It was a gesture of reconciliation. A charity banquet that promised to unite two worlds, wealth and simplicity. The room chosen for dinner was the same one where years ago Rafael had been ridiculed for suggesting food that was too simple. But now the scenario was different. Pendant lights, elegant tables, sparkling glasses, and an atmosphere of anticipation. And in the center of it all, his name printed on the menu, guest chef, Rafael Moretti. He arrived early, accompanied by his team. My heart was beating fast, not out of fear, but out of awareness of how much that moment meant. As he walked through the doors of the hall, he vividly remembered the scene of his dismissal. Eduardo's cold gaze, the muffled laughter of the executives, the bitter taste of humiliation. But now, that same ground would be the stage for something completely different. Eduardo was waiting for him at the entrance, wearing a dark suit, with a calm posture and a look that mixed respect and gratitude. I'm glad you accepted, he said. Me too, Rafael replied. I think somehow it was meant to be here. The businessman nodded. And that's why the name of the project is Restart at the Table. Rafael smiled discreetly. Nice name. It was inspired by you, Eduardo added. The event has started. Business people, food critics, students, and special guests took their places. The murmur of conversation mingled with the soft sound of a string quartet. In the center of the room, a large screen displayed images of the young people who would receive scholarships funded by the E initiative. Rafael watched everything in silence. He had prepared a menu that told a story, his, dishes that symbolized the stages of life, simplicity, overcoming, and gratitude. Each recipe had a hidden memory, and each flavor was a fragment of the path traveled. When dinner was served, the hall fell silent. The guests tasted the first course, a mushroom risotto with a touch of truffles, exactly like the one that had once been the object of their scorn. But now, the flavor carried a new meaning. It was the same dish, only cooked with respect. Eduardo watched the reactions, moved. I knew that dinner wasn't about food. It was about scars turned into learning. During his opening speech, he took the microphone and, in a firm voice, said, Today we're not just here to celebrate the talent of a great chef. We're here to remind you that respect is the noblest ingredient in life. He paused and looked at Rafael, sitting in the front row. Years ago, I made a grave mistake. I confused power with value, money with dignity. And a man I humiliated taught me, without rancor, the true taste of greatness. The entire hall fell silent. Some were moved, others just lowered their heads. Eduardo continued, "Today I give back to the world what I learned from him, that no one is too small to be respected, that humility is not weakness, it is a seasoning of character." The audience gave a standing ovation. Rafael stood up, visibly moved, and went up onto the stage. He took the microphone and said in a firm but calm voice, "I agreed to cook here today not to prove anything. I came to show that we are all the result of the stories we digest, and the ones we choose not to repeat." He looked at the audience and added, "The dish you tasted tonight was born from one man's mistake and another's pain, but it was forgiveness that gave it its final flavor." Applause rang out again, but this time there was no spectacle. There was truth. After the event, while the guests left, Eduardo and Rafael were left alone in the hall. The sound of glasses being collected and the scent of dishes still lingered in the air. Eduardo approached. "I wanted to thank you once again." Rafael smiled. "Me too." "For what?" "For letting me turn a wound into a main course." The businessman laughed, moved. "I think this time it was me who learned." "Life has its ways of teaching," Rafael replied. "Sometimes the teacher is the student you despised." The two looked at each other in silence. There was no more resentment, no more pride, just the understanding that respect, once served, satisfies both sides of the table. The charity event had ended a few days ago, but the memories of that night were still vivid in Rafael's mind. The applause, the emotional looks, Eduardo's words echoed like a silent symphony within him. It was as if life, after so long, had finally balanced the measures. A spoonful of pain, another of learning, and a generous pinch of redemption. That Sunday morning, he decided to do something he had been putting off for years. He got in the car and drove to the other side of the city, to a simple neighborhood where the asphalt still mixed with the dirt. There, among colorful houses and time-worn facades, there still existed the small restaurant, Dona Helena's, where everything had started again. As soon as he parked, a familiar shiver ran through his body. The old sign swayed in the wind, and the smell of sautéed garlic and onions filled the street, bringing back a sense of home. Rafael entered and was greeted by Mr. Antonio, now older, with white hair, but with the same serene smile. "Well, if it isn't my lost apprentice," said the old man, opening his arms. "I thought you'd forgotten about us." Rafael smiled, moved. "Forgetting about here would be the same as forgetting about myself." The two hugged each other tightly. In that moment, all the layers of time and success disappeared, and the renowned chef returned to being the young dreamer who once sought refuge among pots and pans and advice. They sat at the corner table, the same one where so many conversations had taken place years ago. Mr. Antonio brought 2 steaming plates of risotto. "Try it and see if it's still worthy of your touch," he joked. Rafael tasted it, and the flavor transported him back in time. Each bite was a reminder. The taste of forgiveness begins with recognizing one's own path. "It's perfect as always," he said. "I just followed your recipe," the old man replied. "The one you created the day you arrived here crying, saying no one respected your work." Rafael laughed, shaking his head. "And to think I wanted to give up that day." "That's right," said the old man. "Fate put you in the kitchen to prove that fire isn't just for burning, it's for forging." They were silent for a moment, just listening to the sound of silverware and the soft murmur of the small room. Rafael looked around and realized that the place remained the same, simple, welcoming, and full of soul. "You know, Mr. Antonio," he began, "I thought success would erase the past, but now I see that it only gains flavor when we season it with gratitude." The old man nodded, smiling. "Forgiveness is the last ingredient in every recipe for life, my son. Without it, everything turns bitter in the end." When lunch was over, Rafael went to the kitchen and started helping the staff wash the dishes. Hands accustomed to copper pots and luxury utensils now returned to simple, worn aluminum. But oddly enough, it made him feel more whole than ever. A young cook watched him with admiration. "You're the TV chef, aren't you?" he asked shyly. "Some say so," he replied, smiling. "But here, I'm just another person who's learned to respect the stove. She laughed, not fully understanding the depth of that sentence. But Rafael knew. He was passing on the same lesson the old man had once taught him, that humility is the true spice of success. Before he left an envelope on the counter. Mr. Antonio opened it and, inside, found a generous donation to renovate the restaurant. I can't accept this, Rafael. Yes, you can, he replied. The world needs to continue eating what is made with soul. The old man hugged the chef with teary eyes. I told you back then, cooking is serving the souls of others. I think you understand what that means now. Rafael smiled. Yes, I understand. And I discovered that sometimes the hardest dish to prepare is forgiveness, but it's also the most nourishing. When he left the restaurant, the sun was already beginning to set. The orange sky reflected in the rain puddles on the street, and a light breeze blew the scent of spices and memories. Rafael walked slowly to the car, feeling a deep peace. I knew that somehow that cycle had closed. The man who was once humiliated had forgiven. The arrogant man had redeemed himself. And life, as always, served justice with the flavor of compassion. Rafael's life had stabilized. After the charity event and the visit to the old restaurant, the days returned to the calm rhythm of the kitchen, the Golden House. The customers kept coming. The compliments were constant, and reservations were piling up weeks in advance. But in the midst of the calm, something inside him kept him awake, a feeling that fate still had one more dish to serve. It was a rainy Wednesday when Camilla, the manager, hurried into the kitchen. Chef, we have a special reservation for today. Name, Augusto Villani. Rafael looked up, surprised. Villani, the food critic? The very one, she replied. The most feared in the city. The name was enough to trigger memories. Villani was known for his sharp critiques and his power to transform careers, both for success and failure. Years ago, he had destroyed Rafael's reputation with a single review when the chef was still trying to establish himself in the market. Honest dishes but without soul, wrote the critic, words that haunted him for months. Rafael was silent, for a moment, staring at the steam rising from the pots. Camilla watched him. Is everything okay? It will, he replied. I just need to cook with more heart than ever. As night fell, the hall was filled with an atmosphere of concealed tension. The critic's table was ready, simple but impeccable. Villani entered with his notebook, his gaze cold and calculating, the same one that made chefs tremble at festivals. He nodded to the waiter and sat down. From the kitchen, Rafael watched. It wasn't fear I felt. It was respect. I knew that each dish was a silent dialogue between the cook and the taster, and that night I wanted the dialogue to say everything that words couldn't. Prepared 3 dishes, an amuse-bouche inspired by childhood, a main course that represented overcoming, and a dessert dedicated to gratitude. Each step was a memory transformed into flavor. When the first dish arrived at the table, the critic analyzed it in silence, tasting it slowly. He closed his eyes for a moment, and no one knew if that was good or bad. The second dish arrived, and the same ritual was repeated. By the third, the silence had become almost unbearable. Camilla whispered next to the pass. I can't take this tension anymore. Rafael took a deep breath. If he doesn't like it, at least he'll prove my truth. After a few minutes, Villani got up. The entire room followed the movement with curious looks. He walked to the kitchen counter where Rafael was waiting and stopped in front of him. Rafael Moretti, the critic said, his voice grave. It's been years since I've tasted anything you've made. I remember, replied the chef, and I remember what you wrote. Villani placed the notebook on the counter. Honest dishes but without soul, he repeated. You know, back then I thought I was right. But today, I realized that maybe it was I who lost my soul. Rafael frowned in surprise. The critic continued. Today, when I tasted your food, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Warmth. Truth. The taste of someone who has made mistakes and learned from them. That is soul. The entire hall listened in silence. Camilla smiled, holding back tears. Villani took the pen and wrote something in the notebook before closing it. "The review comes out tomorrow," he said. "And it won't just be about food. It'll be about the difference between cooking with ego and cooking with purpose." He reached out his hand. Rafael squeezed firmly. "Thank you," said the chef. "Don't thank me," the critic replied. "Thank life for not letting you give up. It always serves the same dish until we learn how to season it properly." The next morning, the local newspaper carried the headline, "The Chef Who Served the Taste of Humanity." The text spoke of redemption, humility, and the power of forgiveness reflected in Rafael's dishes. Villani described the restaurant as a temple where respect is the main ingredient. The reserves doubled, but more than that, something inside Rafael finally quieted. He understood that he no longer cooked to prove himself to anyone. He cooked to give back to life everything it had taught him. That night, before closing the restaurant, he was alone in the kitchen. He turned on a light, helped himself to a simple dish, and smiled. The taste was perfect, not because of the seasoning, but because the heart was finally at peace. The sun rose slowly over the elegant facade of the golden house, tinting the windows with golden hues. Rafael surveyed the empty restaurant dining room, impeccable tables, neatly lined chairs, glasses glinting in the soft light. There, where so many stories had been served, he felt that something inside him was also renewed. Since critic Villani's visit, the restaurant had become a symbol, not just haute cuisine, but what he had always believed: food is memory, respect, and soul. Customers came from far and wide, attracted not only by the flavor, but by the story behind each dish, and each one left taking a little of what Rafael learned, that the strongest seasoning is the heart. But he knew that success alone was not enough. The true purpose still called to him, a silent call, coming from the alleys where young men dreamed of cooking without pots, where talents died before lighting the fire. It was on one of those mornings, between one coffee and another, that the idea was born. He called Camilla, now his manager and confidant. "Camilla, I want to transform the upstairs into something different." "Different how?" she asked curiously. "A school. Free." "A school?" Rafael smiled. "Yes, a kitchen school. I want to teach those who never had a chance. I want to give back what I received." Camilla looked at him with teary eyes. "Are you sure? This will change a lot of things." "I do," he replied. "What is success if it doesn't change the world around you?" Weeks passed. The news spread. Renowned chef turns restaurant into school for underprivileged youth. Newspapers, TV shows, and even former critics commented on the gesture. But for Rafael, the most important thing was the faces that now filled the upstairs. Boys and girls from poor neighborhoods, their eyes shining at the gleaming utensils. On the first day of school, he walked into the kitchen and everyone stood up. "Sit down," he said, smiling. "Here, no one is more important than anyone else, not even the chef." The group laughed. Rafael continued, "Today you're not going to learn how to cook, you're going to learn how to serve. And I'm not talking about serving dishes. I'm talking about serving people." He walked between the benches, observing each student. "When someone eats your food, may it taste like care, like love, like truth." He paused, because that's what cooking is, transforming what you feel into something that someone else can taste. Camilla watched from afar, proudly. I knew that this was the final destination of the entire journey. Not the stage, not the prize, but the legacy. Among the students there was a young woman who stood out. His name was Iris, 17 years old, daughter of a maid who dreamed of giving her daughter a better future. She was shy, but had steady hands and watchful eyes. Rafael saw in her a reflection of who he once was. One night, when the restaurant was already empty, she approached. "Chef, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Iris." "Why do you do this? Why do you teach for free?" Rafael smiled. "Because someone believed in me when no one else did, and because the most beautiful thing there is giving back." She nodded, excited. One day, I want to be like you. No, he replied. One day I want to taste something you made and feel proud to have been a part of your journey. Months later, the project grew. Other chefs joined the cause. Eduardo, the businessman who once humiliated him, became the school's main investor, and the restaurant, which once served only the rich, now fed dreams. In the main hall, hanging on the wall, a new phrase replaced the restaurant's old slogan, "Here, we serve respect," the most expensive and simplest dish in the world. Rafael spent his days between classes, cooking pots and laughter, and sometimes, when the aroma of mushroom risotto filled the air, he remembered everything that had brought him here, the pain, the humiliation, the forgiveness, and the taste of a second chance. That night, as she was closing up, Camilla approached and asked, "Have you noticed that your story has become an example?" Rafael looked at the empty hall, lit by a single light. "No," he replied with a serene smile. "I just cooked what life served me." Time passed like steam escaping from a forgotten pot, silent, inevitable. Years have passed since the first day Rafael opened his cooking school. Now his hair was gray and his hands, marked by fire and time, still held the utensils with the same delicacy as someone holding a secret. The golden house had changed. The tables still shone, but the brightest glow came from the eyes of the young cooks who worked there. Many were former students of the school, now chefs and managers. Others, like Iris, had followed in the master's footsteps and surpassed him. One winter afternoon, Rafael called everyone to a meeting. Camila, now his partner and friend for decades, noticed the different tone in his voice. "What's going on, Rafa?" she asked. He smiled with that calm look that only time teaches. "I want to prepare one last dinner." "Last?" she repeated, surprised. "What do you mean last?" "The farewell dinner." "Mine," he replied. "I want to bring everyone together, students, friends, and even Eduardo. A dinner to close the cycle." Camilla remained silent. I knew there was no point in arguing. The chef who had spent his life teaching about the value of each meal now wanted to serve the last one, the one that would nourish not the body, but the soul of all who helped build his story. In the following days, the restaurant was transformed. The walls were decorated with old photos, notes from students, newspaper clippings, and mementos from every stage of the journey. The air seemed filled with nostalgia and gratitude. On the appointed night, the hall was packed. Familiar faces occupied each table. Former employees, critics, loyal customers, and the young people who had learned to cook there. Among them, Eduardo, now a white-haired man with a humble expression, sitting discreetly in the background. Rafael came in wearing his old apron. Applause filled the hall, but he gestured for silence. "Today, I'm not a chef. I'm just grateful," he said. "Life has taught me that the fire in the kitchen is like the fire in existence. If you don't know how to control it, it burns you. But if you learn to control it, it warms you." Dinner has begun. He served a simple but symbolic menu. Mushroom risotto, the dish that made him humiliated and then recognized. In every bite, there was more than flavor. There was story. While the guests ate, Rafael walked between the tables, greeting, hugging, and exchanging knowing glances. The room was lit by a soft, almost golden light that made everything look like a painting. When the last dish was served, he stepped onto the small makeshift stage. He grabbed the microphone with trembling hands and took a deep breath. "All my life I thought success was being applauded," he said. "Then I discovered that true success is looking back and seeing that you helped others rise up." He paused. Tearful eyes roamed the faces before him. "I don't want to be remembered as the chef who made expensive dishes. I want to be remembered as someone who taught that respect is the only essential ingredient." Camilla cried discreetly. Eduardo moved, raised his glass, and made a silent toast. Iris, now a renowned chef, watched the master with a heavy heart. Rafael then took an envelope out of his pocket and placed it on the counter. "Here's my latest recipe," he said. "It has no measurements or ingredients, just instructions. Cook with soul. Serve with love. And never forget to give thanks for every dish, even the bitter ones. Applause filled the hall, long, sincere, like a collective hug. Rafael smiled, closed his eyes for a moment, and felt the peace he had been searching for. That was the taste of the perfect ending. The next morning the restaurant was quiet. Camilla arrived early and found a still warm cup of coffee on the counter and a letter left by Rafael. She opened it with trembling hands and read, "If you are reading this, it is because it is my time to rest. But don't be sad. The kitchen will live on in the hands of those who have learned what really matters. Cooking is loving without needing to say anything, and serving is the most beautiful way to thank life for still being here." Camilla cried, holding the paper carefully. Outside, the sun was rising as always, calm, serene, constant, and in that soft glow, she knew for sure, Rafael had not left. It had simply transformed into the aroma that would remain forever, in the memory of all who tasted the flavor of his soul. Life is a fleeting banquet. What remains is not the dish, but the gesture. To respect and serve with love is to cook your own legacy, and forgiveness is the last dinner we should all learn to prepare.